I spent 7 years building Michael Rodriguez into the man he became, and 5 years turning TechFlow Solutions into the company it was. When Jessica Chen walked through our office doors as the new CEO, I had no idea she was the woman my husband had been secretly messaging on dating apps for months. Her first executive decision wasn't about company strategy or budget allocation. It was firing me, the woman who stood between her and the life she wanted to steal. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in Austin. I was rushing around our Cedar Park kitchen, packing Michael's lunch while simultaneously reviewing quarterly marketing reports on my tablet. Coffee dripped steadily into the pot, filling our home with that familiar aroma that had become the soundtrack to our morning routine. Michael sat at the breakfast bar, scrolling through his phone with unusual intensity, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Earth to Michael," I called out, sliding his sandwich across the granite countertop. "Your presentation to the Henderson Group is today, remember? The one we practiced all weekend?" He looked up, that strange smile disappearing instantly. "Right, yeah. Thanks, babe." His fingers moved quickly across his screen, and I caught the telltale sound of a message being sent before he powered down the device and slipped it into his pocket. "Everything okay at work?" I asked, genuinely concerned. Michael had been distant lately, claiming stress from his new position as sales director, but something felt different. There was an energy about him, an excitement that seemed disconnected from anything happening in our life together. "Just busy season," he replied, standing to kiss my forehead. It was perfunctory, mechanical, nothing like the passionate goodbye kisses we used to share when he'd grab me around the waist and tell me I was his good luck charm. You know how it is. I did know. I'd supported him through business school, working overtime at TechFlow to cover our expenses while he pursued his MBA. I'd celebrated every promotion, every success, treating his victories as our victories, because that's what partnerships were supposed to be about. When he landed the sales director position at Morrison Analytics 6 months ago, I'd thrown him a surprise party, inviting everyone who mattered to celebrate the achievement we'd worked toward together. Standing in our kitchen that morning, watching him gather his things with distracted efficiency, I pushed down the nagging feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Michael had been working late more often, going out for drinks with colleagues I'd never met, and spending considerable time on his phone, even when we were supposed to be having quality time together. When I'd suggested we plan a weekend getaway to reconnect, he'd cited budget concerns and work obligations, yet somehow he'd found money for expensive new clothes and a gym membership he never seemed to use. "I'll probably be late tonight," he said, already heading toward the garage. Team building event. Another team building event. They seemed to happen with increasing frequency, always on short notice, always without spouses invited. I'd stopped asking about them after Michael had snapped at me for being, quote, clingy and suspicious. Instead, I'd thrown myself deeper into my work at TechFlow, where I felt valued and accomplished. TechFlow Solutions had been my professional home for 5 years, and I'd poured my heart into building something meaningful there. When I started as a junior marketing coordinator, the company was struggling to differentiate itself in Austin's competitive tech landscape. The marketing department consisted of me and an intern who lasted 3 weeks before deciding startup life wasn't for her. I'd worked 18-hour days crafting campaigns, building relationships with local media, and developing the brand identity that eventually helped TechFlow secure major contracts with companies like Dell and IBM. By my 3rd year, I was promoted to senior marketing manager, leading a team of 6 and overseeing a budget that had grown by 300%. Our campaigns had won regional awards, and I'd been featured in Austin Business Journal as one of the city's rising marketing stars under 35. The work wasn't just a job, it was my passion. My proof that a first-generation college graduate from a working-class family could make a real impact in the business world. That Tuesday morning, I arrived at our downtown office building with the same enthusiasm I'd felt every day for 5 years. TechFlow occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse in the heart of Austin's tech district, and I'd been part of choosing everything from the open concept layout to the local artists whose work decorated our walls. Walking through those doors felt like coming home to a place I'd helped create. "Morning, Emma," called David Martinez from his desk near the windows. David was our lead graphic designer, a talented artist who joined the company 2 years ago and quickly became both a valued colleague and a genuine friend. He had this way of making everyone feel seen and appreciated, always remembering details about people's lives and checking in when someone seemed stressed or overwhelmed. "How's the Morrison campaign coming along?" I asked, stopping by his workspace to admire the mock-ups scattered across his monitor screens. David had this incredible ability to translate abstract marketing concepts into visual stories that resonated with audiences. Watching him work was like watching magic happen in real time. "Almost finished with the final round of revisions," he replied, pulling up a particularly striking design that captured everything we'd been trying to communicate about our client's brand evolution. "I think this version really captures what we discussed about authentic innovation versus flashy trends." We spent a few minutes refining details, and I found myself appreciating how easy it was to collaborate with David. Unlike the increasingly strained communication I'd been experiencing at home, our professional relationship flowed naturally. We challenged each other's ideas respectfully, built on each other's strengths, and celebrated wins together without ego or competition getting in the way. The morning flew by in productive meetings and creative problem-solving sessions. I was deep in conversation with Linda Thompson, our HR director, about the upcoming company retreat when my assistant knocked on the conference room door with unusual urgency. "Emma, sorry to interrupt, but there's an all-hands meeting called for 2 o'clock. Mandatory attendance." Her expression was serious, almost worried. "They just sent the email 5 minutes ago." Linda and I exchanged glances. Mandatory all-hands meetings were rare at TechFlow, usually reserved for major announcements like acquisitions or significant organizational changes. Our CEO, Robert Chen, was known for transparent communication and rarely surprised employees with sudden gatherings. "Did they say what it's about?" Linda asked. "Just that Robert has an important announcement regarding company leadership." A chill ran down my spine, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Robert was only 55 and passionate about the company he'd built from the ground up. He'd never mentioned retirement or selling, and our recent financial performance had been strong. Still, something about the urgency and timing felt ominous. The afternoon dragged as speculation rippled through the office. Small groups huddled in conference rooms and at coffee stations, everyone trying to piece together clues about what might be coming. David stopped by my office around 1:30, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by concerned curiosity. "Have you heard anything through the management channels?" he asked, settling into one of the chairs across from my desk. "Nothing concrete," I admitted. Robert seemed fine in our leadership meeting yesterday. He was excited about the Q4 projections and talking about expansion plans for next year. "Maybe it's good news then," David suggested, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Could be announcing a promotion or new partnership." At exactly 2 o'clock, the entire TechFlow team gathered in our main conference room. Robert stood at the front, looking uncharacteristically formal in a suit, instead of his usual startup uniform of jeans and company-branded polo shirts. His expression was serious, but not distressed, which offered some reassurance. "Thank you all for gathering on short notice," he began, his voice carrying easily through the packed room. "I know this seems sudden, but I have some significant news to share about TechFlow's future." The room fell completely silent, everyone leaning forward slightly in anticipation. After much consideration and discussion with the board, I've made the decision to step back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic advisory and business development. Effective immediately, we have a new chief executive officer who will be leading TechFlow into its next phase of growth. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people processed this unexpected development. Robert had always seemed so hands-on, so integral to every aspect of the company's operations. The idea of him stepping back felt almost impossible to comprehend. I'm thrilled to introduce Jessica Chen, who brings extensive experience in scaling technology companies and has a proven track record of driving innovation in competitive markets. Jessica comes to us from successful leadership positions in San Francisco and New York, and I'm confident she'll help TechFlow reach new heights. The conference room door opened, and a woman walked in who immediately commanded attention. Jessica Chen was striking in a way that went beyond conventional beauty. She carried herself with a kind of confidence that suggested she was accustomed to being the most accomplished person in any room. Her sleek black hair was styled in a perfect bob. Her tailored suit probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. And her smile was simultaneously warm and calculating. "Thank you, Robert," she said, taking the microphone with practiced ease. Her voice was clear and authoritative, with just a hint of an accent that suggested international experience. "I'm incredibly excited to be joining the TechFlow family and working with such a talented team." As she began outlining her vision for the company's future, I found myself studying her face and trying to understand why something about her presence felt unsettling. She spoke eloquently about growth strategies and market opportunities, hitting all the right notes about innovation and team collaboration. Everything she said sounded perfectly reasonable, even inspiring. Yet something deep in my gut twisted with unease as I watched her scan the room, making eye contact with various employees as she spoke. When her gaze landed on me, she paused for just a fraction of a second longer than seemed natural. Her smile remained perfectly professional, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, calculation, or perhaps satisfaction. It was so brief, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. After the meeting, employees clustered in small groups processing the news and speculating about what changes might be coming. Most seemed cautiously optimistic. Robert wouldn't have chosen someone he didn't trust, and Jessica's credentials were impressive. A few of the longer-tenured employees expressed sadness about Robert stepping back, but overall the mood was more curious than concerned. David found me in my office an hour later, where I was staring blankly at my computer screen, trying to refocus on the Morrison campaign materials. "So what did you think of our new fearless leader?" he asked, settling into his usual chair with a cup of coffee from the break room. "She seems..." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Capable," I replied carefully, still unable to shake the strange feeling from our brief moment of eye contact. "Very polished. Professional." "That's a diplomatic way of saying something," David observed with a slight smile. "Come on, what's your real first impression?" I considered how to articulate the unease I couldn't logically explain. "I think she's probably very good at her job. I just hope she understands what makes TechFlow special before she starts implementing changes." Fair point. It would be a shame if we lost the collaborative culture that makes this place feel different from other tech companies. We spent a few more minutes discussing the transition before David headed back to finish the Morrison materials. Alone in my office, I tried to focus on quarterly budget projections, but my mind kept drifting to Jessica's confident presentation, and that strange moment when our eyes met. Something about her felt familiar in a way I couldn't place, though I was certain we'd never met before today. Around 5:30, most of the office had cleared out for the evening. I was packing up my laptop when my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Running even later than expected. "Don't wait up. Love you." Another late night, another team-building event or client dinner or whatever excuse was keeping him away from home with increasing frequency. I'd stopped challenging these explanations months ago, after repeated arguments that left me feeling paranoid and unreasonable. Instead, I'd learned to fill the lonely evenings with work projects, exercise, or calls with friends who actually seemed interested in maintaining their relationships. Driving home through Austin traffic, I found myself thinking about the early days of my relationship with Michael. We'd met in college, both ambitious students working multiple jobs to pay for school. He'd been charming and attentive, the kind of person who made you feel like the most interesting person in the room when he focused his attention on you. Our first few years together had been genuinely happy. Late nights studying together, celebrating each other's achievements, dreaming about the life we'd build once we both established our careers. The shift had been gradual enough that I'd initially attributed it to normal relationship evolution. People grew more comfortable with each other, developed independent routines, stopped putting quite as much effort into romantic gestures. I'd told myself it was healthy that we weren't as obsessively focused on each other as we'd been in our early 20s, but lately the distance felt more profound than simple comfort. Michael seemed to be growing into someone I didn't recognize, someone whose interests and priorities no longer aligned with the person I'd fallen in love with. When I'd tried to address this in conversations, he'd accused me of being needy or trying to hold him back from professional success. Eventually, I'd stopped bringing it up, focusing instead on my own career and personal growth. Our house in Cedar Park felt empty and echoing when I arrived home. I heated leftover pasta, poured a glass of wine, and settled on the couch with my laptop to review the materials Jessica had requested from department heads. She wanted comprehensive reports on current projects, team structures, and budget allocations. Standard stuff for a new executive trying to understand operations. As I worked through the marketing department overview, I felt a surge of pride reviewing everything we'd accomplished over the past 5 years. The growth metrics were impressive, our client retention rates were industry-leading, and team satisfaction scores consistently ranked among the highest in the company. Whatever changes Jessica might implement, she'd be inheriting a department that was performing exceptionally well. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang with a call from Sophie Williams, my best friend since college, and one of the few people who'd consistently supported me through the various challenges of adult life. "How was the big announcement today?" she asked without preamble. Sophie worked in marketing for a nonprofit downtown and always wanted to hear about the latest developments in Austin's corporate landscape. "Interesting," I replied, settling deeper into the couch cushions. "Robert is stepping back and we have a new CEO, Jessica Chen. Very impressive resume." "That's exciting. Change can be good, especially if she brings fresh perspectives and new opportunities." "Definitely," I agreed, though something in my tone must have suggested ambivalence. "But?" Sophie prompted, knowing me well enough to read between conversational lines. "I don't know. Something about her just felt off. Not necessarily bad, just somehow unsettling in a way I can't explain. First day nerves, maybe? New leadership is always awkward until everyone settles into new dynamics." We talked for another 20 minutes about work, relationships, and weekend plans. Sophie mentioned she was dating someone new, a photographer she'd met through a mutual friend, and her excitement was infectious enough to momentarily lift my mood. Hearing about healthy relationship dynamics reminded me what I'd been missing in my own marriage. Michael arrived home around 10:30, clearly having had several drinks at whatever event had kept him out. He was affectionate in the sloppy way that alcohol sometimes made him, pulling me into a hug that felt more performative than genuine. "How was your day, beautiful?" he asked, his words slightly slurred as he kissed my neck with beer-scented breath. "Fine," I replied, gently extricating myself from his embrace. "We got a new CEO today. Robert is stepping back." "That's nice," he mumbled, already heading toward the bedroom without really processing what I'd said. "I'm exhausted. Going to bed." Within minutes, I could hear him snoring softly from our bedroom. I remained on the couch, finishing my wine and thinking about how disconnected we'd become. When had we stopped really talking to each other? When had his responses to my news become so automatic and disinterested? The next morning brought another rushed breakfast routine, though Michael seemed more alert and engaged than he had in weeks. He was checking his phone constantly, that same secretive smile appearing whenever messages arrived. "Big day ahead?" I asked, refilling his coffee mug. "Always," he replied distractedly, fingers flying across his screen as he typed responses with unusual urgency. "The Henderson presentation went well yesterday?" "What? Oh yeah. Fine. They loved it." His attention remained focused on his phone, and I realized he could have told me anything about the presentation, and I'd have no way of verifying whether it was true. At TechFlow, Jessica had scheduled individual meetings with all department heads to discuss current projects and future goals. My appointment was at 10 o'clock, and I'd prepared extensively, gathering performance metrics, client feedback, and strategic recommendations for the marketing department's continued growth. Jessica's temporary office was Robert's old space, though she'd already made subtle changes that reflected her personal style. The family photos and casual artwork had been replaced with sleek professional certificates, and a few carefully chosen pieces that suggested sophisticated taste and international experience. "Emma, thank you for making time this morning," she said as I settled into the chair across from her desk. Her smile was professional and appropriately warm, though something about it still felt calculated. "I've been looking forward to learning more about the marketing department's operations." I'm excited to share what we've been working on, I replied, opening my laptop to display the presentation I'd prepared. The team has accomplished some remarkable things over the past few years, and there are several exciting opportunities I think you'll find interesting. For the next 30 minutes, I walked through our major campaigns, client success stories, and growth projections, with the confidence that came from genuinely loving my work. Jessica asked thoughtful questions and took detailed notes, seeming genuinely engaged with the information I was presenting. "This is impressive work," she said when I finished the formal presentation. "The client retention rates are particularly noteworthy. How do you attribute that success?" "I think it comes down to understanding that marketing isn't just about selling products. It's about building authentic relationships between brands and their audiences. When you focus on creating genuine value rather than just pushing messages, clients see real results and want to continue working together." "Authentic relationships," Jessica repeated, her tone thoughtful. "That's an interesting philosophy. Tell me, Emma, how important would you say personal authenticity is in professional success?" The question seemed oddly specific, almost philosophical for a business meeting. "I think authenticity builds trust, and trust is fundamental to everything we do. Whether it's with clients, colleagues, or leadership, people respond better when they believe you're being genuine." "And in your personal life? Do you find that same principle applies to marriage, for example?" Something cold settled in my stomach as Jessica asked this question. Why would my marriage be relevant to a professional discussion about marketing strategies? I maintained my composure, but alarm bells were definitely starting to ring. "I try to bring the same values to all my relationships," I replied carefully. "Honesty and authenticity matter whether you're talking about business or personal connections." Jessica nodded slowly, making another note on her legal pad before looking up with that same calculating smile I'd noticed during yesterday's all-hands meeting. "Meet me at the coffee hub on South Lamar at 6 p.m. Come alone." "A friend." My hands shook as I read the message twice, then 3 times, trying to make sense of what was happening. Someone wanted to tell me things about Michael. Someone who knew enough about my life to know where I worked and how to reach me. The timing, just hours after Jessica's strange questions about authenticity and deception, couldn't be coincidental. I stared at my phone screen until the words blurred, my mind racing through possibilities and explanations, none of them offering any comfort. Whatever was coming, whatever truths were about to be revealed, I knew with absolute certainty that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The Coffee Hub was one of those Austin establishments that perfectly captured the city's blend of tech innovation and artistic soul. Exposed brick walls displayed rotating exhibitions from local artists, mismatched vintage furniture created cozy conversation nooks, and the constant hum of espresso machines provided a soundtrack to countless business meetings, first dates, and life-changing conversations. I'd been there dozens of times over the years, but walking through the door that evening felt like entering foreign territory. I arrived 15 minutes early, my nerves too frayed to wait at the office any longer. The mysterious text had consumed my thoughts for the past 2 hours, each possible explanation more disturbing than the last. Who knew enough about my personal life to reach out with warnings about Michael? What could they possibly know that I didn't? And why did the timing coincide so perfectly with Jessica's unsettling questions about authenticity and deception? I ordered a lavender latte more for something to do with my hands than from any actual desire for caffeine. My stomach was too knotted to consider food, though the pastry display case usually tempted me with its array of local bakery offerings. Instead, I found a corner table with clear sightlines to both entrances and settled in to wait, checking my phone obsessively for additional messages that never came. At exactly 6 o'clock, a young man approached my table with a kind of hesitant energy that suggested he was as nervous about this meeting as I was. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with sandy brown hair and earnest blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Everything about his appearance suggested reliability and honesty, from his well-worn but clean button-down shirt to the messenger bag slung across his shoulder. "Emma Rodriguez?" he asked quietly, glancing around the coffee shop as if concerned about being overheard. I nodded, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "You're the friend who texted." "Ryan Park," he said, settling into the seat and immediately pulling out his phone. "I work with Michael at Morrison Analytics." We've been friends since college, and I've been wrestling with whether to reach out for weeks now. The familiar knot in my stomach tightened as he mentioned Michael's name. Whatever Ryan was about to tell me, it was going to confirm suspicions I'd been trying to ignore for months. His expression was genuinely conflicted, like someone who'd been losing sleep over a difficult decision. "What do you know about my husband?" I asked directly, unable to tolerate small talk when my entire world felt like it was balanced on the edge of a cliff. Ryan took a deep breath, his fingers drumming nervously against his phone case. "Emma, I want you to know that telling you this goes against every instinct I have about loyalty and friendship. Michael and I have been close for over a decade, but what he's doing to you is wrong, and I can't stay silent anymore." "Just tell me," I said quietly, bracing myself for whatever revelation was coming. He turned his phone toward me, displaying what appeared to be a dating app profile. The photos were unmistakably Michael, though he'd clearly put effort into selecting images that presented his most attractive angles. His profile described him as a successful sales executive who enjoyed travel, fine dining, and was looking for someone who shares my ambition and appreciates the finer things in life. He's been active on multiple dating platforms for at least 6 months, Ryan continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I only found out by accident when he left his phone unlocked during a client dinner and notifications kept popping up. When I confronted him about it, he claimed it was just harmless flirting, a way to boost his ego during a stressful period at work." My hands trembled as I stared at Michael's profile, reading the carefully crafted description that made no mention of being married. The photos were recent, some taken during trips I remembered him claiming were work-related conferences. In one image, he was wearing the expensive watch I'd given him for our 5th wedding anniversary, a detail that felt like a particular betrayal. "There's more," Ryan said reluctantly, swiping to reveal a series of message screenshots. "He's been meeting women for drinks, dinners, even weekend trips he's told you are work obligations. But there's one person he's been particularly focused on lately." He showed me a conversation thread that made my blood run cold. The messages between Michael and someone named Jessica were intimate, flirtatious, and clearly indicated an ongoing relationship that extended far beyond casual online interaction. They discussed meeting plans, shared inside jokes, and exchanged photos that suggested a level of emotional and physical intimacy that shattered any remaining illusions I might have harbored about my marriage. "Jessica Chen," I whispered, recognizing the name that had become central to my professional life just 24 hours earlier. Ryan's eyes widened in surprise. "You know her? She's my new CEO. She started at TechFlow yesterday." The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity, creating a picture of betrayal so elaborate it felt almost impossible to comprehend. "Jesus, Emma, I had no idea she was connected to your workplace. This is so much worse than I thought." Ryan ran his hands through his hair, clearly overwhelmed by the implications of what he'd just revealed. I scrolled through more of the message exchanges, each one delivering fresh wounds to my already shattered sense of reality. Michael had been telling Jessica about his marriage, describing me as understanding but boring, and claiming that we'd grown apart naturally. He painted himself as a man trapped in a relationship that no longer fulfilled him. Someone who deserved passion and excitement that his wife couldn't provide. "When did this start?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The dating app activity began around 6 months ago, but his conversations with Jessica go back about 4 months. From what I could piece together, they matched online and quickly moved to more private communication channels. 4 months. 4 months of elaborate deception while I'd been supporting his career, managing our household, and trying to address the growing distance between us through honest conversation and relationship efforts. 4 months of him coming home to me every night while maintaining an entirely separate emotional and romantic life with another woman." "There's something else you need to know," Ryan continued, his expression growing even more grave. "Jessica isn't just some random person he met online. She's been strategic about this whole situation. According to their messages, she knew about his connection to you before she accepted the CEO position at TechFlow." The coffee shop suddenly felt airless, the cheerful conversations around us fading into meaningless background noise. "What do you mean she knew about me?" She researched Michael's background when they started getting serious, found out about his marriage and your career. The CEO position at TechFlow wasn't just a career opportunity for her. It was a way to get closer to the life she wanted to claim. I stared at Ryan in disbelief, struggling to process the calculated nature of what he was describing. You're saying she took the job specifically to interfere with my marriage? From their messages, it seems like she saw you as an obstacle to be removed rather than a person deserving of basic respect and honesty. She's been encouraging Michael to leave you, but she also wanted to ensure that you wouldn't have the financial stability or professional standing to be a long-term problem. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Jessica's strange questions during our meeting suddenly made perfect sense. She hadn't been making conversation or testing my professional philosophy. She'd been studying her opposition, gathering information about the woman whose life she was systematically dismantling. I have to go, I said abruptly, standing up so quickly that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. Several other coffee shop patrons glanced in our direction, but I was beyond caring about making a scene. Emma, wait, Ryan called, rising to follow me. I know this is overwhelming, but you need to be careful about how you handle this. Jessica is clearly manipulative, and Michael is so caught up in whatever fantasy she's selling that he's lost all perspective. I paused at the door, turning back to face this stranger who just destroyed my understanding of my own life. Why are you telling me this? You said Michael is your friend. Ryan's expression was pained but resolute. Because friendship doesn't mean enabling someone to hurt innocent people. Because my own marriage means everything to me. And I can't imagine the kind of person who could do what Michael is doing to you. And because someone needed to give you the truth, so you could make informed decisions about your future. Thank you, I managed to say, though the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what he'd revealed. I need time to process this. If you need anything, if there's any way I can help, please don't hesitate to reach out, Ryan said, handing me a business card. I'm sorry you're going through this, Emma. You deserve so much better. The drive home passed in a blur of Austin traffic and racing thoughts. Every stoplight gave me time to consider new aspects of the betrayal, each more painful than the last. How long had Michael been planning to leave me? Had Jessica influenced his recent coldness and distance, or had those changes made him vulnerable to her manipulation? How many of his late nights and work events had actually been dates with her? Our house felt different when I walked through the door, like a stage set for a play I'd been unknowingly performing in for months. Every familiar object, our wedding photos, the furniture we'd chosen together, the artwork we'd collected during happier times, now seemed like props in an elaborate deception. I wondered how many times Michael had stood in this same space while texting Jessica, how many conversations he'd had with her while I was in the next room, trusting and oblivious. Michael wasn't home yet, which gave me time to think about how to confront him with what I'd learned. Part of me wanted to wait up and demand immediate explanations, to force him to look me in the eye while he attempted to justify months of calculated betrayal. Another part of me wanted to pack my bags and disappear, to let him come home to an empty house and figure out that his double life had finally collapsed. Instead, I found myself methodically moving through our shared spaces, seeing everything with new eyes. His expensive new clothes hanging in our closet, purchased with money he'd claimed we needed to save. The gym membership card on his dresser for a facility I'd never seen him visit. A receipt tucked into his jacket pocket for a restaurant I'd never been to, dated last weekend when he'd told me he was working late on quarterly reports. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Client dinner running really late. Don't wait up again. Sorry, babe. Another lie, delivered with casual ease after months of practice. I stared at the message, wondering if he was actually with Jessica right now, if they were laughing about the naive wife who still believed his increasingly transparent excuses. The thought made me physically nauseous, and I had to sit down on our bed to keep from collapsing. I called Sophie, needing to hear a friendly voice before I completely lost my grip on reality. Hey girl, what's up? She answered cheerfully, clearly not detecting the crisis in my simple greeting. My life is falling apart, I said without preamble, and then the whole story came pouring out. I told her about Jessica's arrival at TechFlow, the strange meeting questions, Ryan's revelations about Michael's dating app activities, and the elaborate deception that had been unfolding right under my nose for months. Sophie listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or outrage. When I finished, she was quiet for several seconds before responding. Emma, I am so sorry. This is absolutely devastating and you don't deserve any of it. Her voice was fierce with protective anger. But I need you to know that this says nothing about your worth as a person or a wife. This is about Michael's character and choices, not about any failings on your part. How did I not see it? I asked, the question that had been torturing me since leaving the coffee shop. How was I so blind to what was happening in my own marriage? Because you trusted the person you loved, and you assumed he was operating with the same honesty and integrity that you bring to relationships. That's not naivete, Emma. That's what normal, healthy people do. The problem isn't that you trusted him. The problem is that he betrayed that trust in the most calculated way possible. We talked for another hour, Sophie, helping me process the immediate shock while beginning to think about practical next steps. I would need to confront Michael, but I also needed to protect myself professionally and financially. If Jessica was willing to take a CEO position just to interfere with my marriage, there was no telling what other manipulative tactics she might employ. Do you want me to come over? Sophie offered. You shouldn't be alone right now. I think I need some time to think before Michael gets home, I replied. But thank you. Just knowing you're there helps more than you know. After we hung up, I sat in our bedroom considering my options. I could confront Michael tonight when he returned from whatever he was actually doing, but I wasn't sure I was emotionally prepared for that conversation. I could pretend nothing had changed while I figured out my next moves, but the thought of maintaining that charade felt impossible now that I knew the truth. Eventually, I decided to focus on protecting myself rather than confronting him immediately. I gathered important documents, birth certificate, passport, financial records, insurance information, and stored them in a safe place outside our house. I took photos of his phone records, made copies of our joint account statements, and documented everything I could think of that might be relevant if this situation escalated to divorce proceedings. Michael came home around midnight, clearly having had several drinks but trying to appear sober and responsible. He went through his usual routine of checking doors and turning off lights, acting like a devoted husband returning from a long day of supporting our family. How was your day? He asked, settling into bed beside me with the casual intimacy of 7 years of marriage. Fine, I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite the storm of emotions raging beneath the surface. How was the client dinner? Productive. We're getting closer to closing the Henderson deal. Another lie delivered with practiced ease. I wondered if he'd rehearsed these cover stories with Jessica, if they'd laughed together about how easily he could deceive his unsuspecting wife. That's great, I said, turning away from him and pretending to settle into sleep. He was snoring within minutes, the deep, peaceful sleep of someone whose conscience wasn't troubling him. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile the man beside me with the person I'd been married to for 7 years. When had he become someone capable of such elaborate deception? Had I ever really known him at all? Or had I been in love with a carefully constructed persona designed to win my trust and support? The next morning brought a return to our usual routine, though everything felt surreal and performative. Michael checked his phone constantly while getting ready for work, that secretive smile appearing whenever messages arrived. I made coffee and prepared breakfast, going through familiar motions while feeling like an actress playing a role I no longer understood. I might be late again tonight, he said, kissing my forehead with the same mechanical affection that had become his standard goodbye. Big presentation to prepare for. Of course, I replied, wondering if he could hear the bitter edge in my voice. At TechFlow, I struggled to focus on routine tasks while processing the previous evening's revelations. Every interaction felt loaded with new meaning, especially when Jessica appeared in the office around 10 o'clock for her second day as CEO. She looked impeccable as always, radiating confidence and authority, but now I could see the calculation behind her professional demeanor. "Good morning, Emma," she said, stopping by my office with what appeared to be casual friendliness. "I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to schedule some time to review the marketing budget in more detail." there are some areas where I think we might find opportunities for optimization. Of course, I replied, keeping my voice professionally neutral, despite wanting to confront her about the elaborate manipulation she'd orchestrated. When would work best for your schedule? This afternoon, around 3. We can meet in the conference room to spread out all the materials. I agreed, though something about her expression suggested this meeting would be about more than budget optimization. After she left, I spent the morning preparing comprehensive documentation of every marketing department expenditure, client contract, and performance metric from the past 2 years. If Jessica was planning to find problems with my work, I wanted to be ready with detailed justifications for every decision. David stopped by around lunchtime, his usual cheerful demeanor tempered by concern. "You seem really stressed today," he observed, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Everything okay?" I considered how much to share with him. David was a trusted colleague and genuine friend, but the situation with Michael and Jessica felt too raw and complicated to explain, without breaking down completely. "Just some personal stuff I'm working through," I said carefully. "Nothing that should affect work, but it's been distracting." "Well, if you need to talk or want someone to listen, I'm here," he offered, with the kind of sincere concern that reminded me what healthy relationships looked like. Sometimes it helps just to say things out loud to someone who cares about your well-being. His kindness was almost overwhelming given everything else I was processing. "Thank you, David. That means more than you know." At 3 o'clock, I gathered my materials and headed to the conference room for what I suspected would be far more than a routine budget review. Walking back to my office, I felt like I was in free fall, watching both my marriage and career crumble simultaneously due to the calculated actions of two people who decided I was an obstacle to their happiness. That evening, I decided it was time to confront Michael directly. Waiting for him to voluntarily confess or hoping the situation would resolve itself was no longer an option. I needed to hear from his own mouth how he justified what he'd been doing, even if his explanations would only confirm what I already knew about his character. He arrived home around 8:30, earlier than he'd been managing recently, looking unusually energetic and happy. Whatever he'd been doing with his day had clearly pleased him, which made the coming conversation feel even more surreal. "You seem like you're in a good mood," I observed, watching him pour himself a glass of wine from a bottle I'd never seen before. "Just a really productive day," he replied, settling onto the couch beside me with obvious satisfaction. "Sometimes everything just clicks, you know? Like all the pieces are finally falling into place." "That's interesting timing," I said, pulling out my phone to display the screenshots Ryan had shared with me. "Because I learned some really interesting things about what's been clicking for you lately." Michael's expression changed instantly when he saw his dating profile on my screen. The color drained from his face and his wine glass trembled slightly in his hand as he processed what I was showing him. "Emma, I can explain," he began, but I held up my hand to stop him. "I know about Jessica," I said quietly. "I know about the dating apps, the meetings, the lies about working late. I know that she took the CEO job at my company specifically to interfere with our marriage. So please don't insult my intelligence by trying to minimize this or claim it was innocent." Michael set down his wine glass and ran his hands through his hair, clearly scrambling for a response that might salvage the situation. "It's not what you think. Jessica and we just connected on a level that you and I haven't had in years. It started as friendship, someone I could talk to about the pressures I've been dealing with at work." "Friendship," I repeated flatly. "Is that what you call planning weekend trips together and talking about your boring wife who doesn't understand your ambitions?" His face flushed with shame and anger, the combination making him look younger and more vulnerable than I'd seen him in years. "You read our private messages? A friend of yours was concerned enough about what you were doing to reach out to me. Someone who actually understands what loyalty and friendship mean, unlike you." Michael stood up abruptly, beginning to pace around our living room like a caged animal. "Ryan had no right to interfere in our marriage. This is between you and me, Emma." "No, Michael. This stopped being between you and me the moment you started lying to me and sleeping with other people. This became about Jessica the moment she decided to insert herself into my professional life to eliminate me as an obstacle to your relationship." "It's not like that," he protested, though his tone suggested he knew how weak his position was. Jessica didn't take the job because of us. She's genuinely qualified and excited about the opportunities at TechFlow. I stared at him in disbelief, amazed that he could still be defending her even when caught in such elaborate deception. Michael, do you even hear yourself? You're more concerned about protecting Jessica's reputation than acknowledging what you've done to our marriage. That's not fair, he snapped, his defensiveness revealing more about his priorities than any direct confession could have. You don't understand the pressure I've been under, the expectations at work, the way our relationship has become routine and predictable. Jessica makes me feel alive again, like I'm worth something more than just paying bills and maintaining a household. So this is my fault? I asked, standing to face him directly. I'm responsible for your decision to lie to me for months while building a relationship with another woman? I'm not saying it's your fault, but we both know things haven't been good between us for a long time. We've been going through the motions, living like roommates instead of lovers. When I met Jessica, I remembered what it felt like to have someone excited about seeing me, someone who appreciated my ambitions instead of taking them for granted. His words stung, because they contained just enough truth to make me question myself. We had fallen into comfortable routines, and I had perhaps taken some aspects of our relationship for granted. But the solution to those problems was honest communication and mutual effort, not secret relationships and elaborate deceptions. If you were unhappy, you should have talked to me about it, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. We could have worked on our marriage, gone to counseling, figured out how to reconnect. Instead, you chose to lie to me while planning your exit strategy with another woman. I didn't plan for this to happen, Michael insisted, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as me. Jessica and I just connected naturally. Sometimes these things develop organically, and you can't control who you fall in love with. You fell in love with her? The question escaped before I could stop it, though I immediately regretted giving him an opening to hurt me even more deeply. Michael's expression softened slightly, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the man I'd thought I married. Emma, I never wanted to hurt you. You're a good person, and you deserved better than the way I've handled this situation. But yes, I love Jessica in a way that I haven't felt in years. She understands my goals and ambitions, she challenges me to be better, and she makes me feel like I can accomplish anything. And I held you back from all of that? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear his answer. Not intentionally, he said carefully, but we wanted different things, had different visions for our future. You're content with stability and routine, while I need excitement and growth. Jessica and I share the same drive, the same hunger for success and adventure. I looked at this man I'd been married to for 7 years, wondering how I'd missed such fundamental differences in our values and character. Had he always been this selfish and manipulative? Or had success and Jessica's influence changed him into someone I no longer recognized? What happens now? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Michael took a deep breath, clearly preparing himself for what he was about to say. I think we both know this marriage isn't working anymore. We've grown apart, become different people who want different things. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that and figure out how to move forward separately. How convenient, I replied, surprising myself with the bitter laugh that escaped. You get to pursue your exciting new relationship while I get to rebuild my life from scratch after giving 7 years to supporting your dreams and ambitions. It doesn't have to be ugly, Emma. We can handle this maturely. Work out the practical details without making each other miserable. I'll make sure you're taken care of financially during the transition. His casual tone, as if we were discussing dividing up household chores rather than ending our marriage, made the betrayal feel even more complete. He'd already moved on emotionally, already planned our future without my input or consent. I need time to think, I said finally, no longer able to continue a conversation that was only confirming the worst aspects of his character. You should stay somewhere else tonight. Emma, that's not necessary. We can handle this like adults. Michael, you've been lying to me for months while planning to leave me for another woman. The time for handling things like adults was before you decided to betray our marriage vows. Right now I need space to process this without having to look at you. He gathered some clothes and toiletries, moving through our house with the efficiency of someone who'd already mentally detached from the life we'd built together. At the door, he paused as if he wanted to say something meaningful, but ultimately just offered a simple goodbye that felt like the end of everything I'd thought I knew about my future. Alone in our house, I sat on the couch where we'd just shattered 7 years of marriage and tried to comprehend the magnitude of change that was about to reshape every aspect of my existence. My husband was leaving me for another woman. That woman was now my boss, and clearly intended to make my professional life as difficult as possible. Everything I'd built, my marriage, my career stability, my sense of identity, was crumbling simultaneously. But underneath the devastation and betrayal, something else was beginning to emerge. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could see my situation clearly. The confusion and self-doubt that had plagued me during Michael's increasing distance suddenly made sense. The growing feeling that something was fundamentally wrong in my life now had an explanation that wasn't about my own inadequacy or failure. I was hurt and angry and scared about the future. But I was also, surprisingly, relieved to finally know the truth. Whatever came next, at least I would be making decisions based on reality, rather than the elaborate fiction that Michael and Jessica had been crafting around me. The next morning, I woke up to find several missed calls and text messages from Michael, all variations on the theme of wanting to talk more and work out details. I ignored them all, focusing instead on getting ready for what I suspected would be a challenging day at TechFlow. Jessica had scheduled an early morning meeting with all department heads, ostensibly to discuss quarterly planning, but more likely to begin implementing whatever organizational changes she'd been planning. I arrived at the office early, wanting time to prepare myself mentally for whatever was coming. David was already at his desk when I walked through the marketing department, and he looked up with obvious concern when he saw my expression. "Rough night?" he asked gently. "You could say that," I replied, settling into my office and immediately diving into email to avoid thinking about personal problems. Around 8:30, Jessica's assistant sent a message asking me to come to her office immediately for an urgent discussion. The timing felt ominous, especially given everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. I knocked on Jessica's door and waited for her invitation to enter. She was seated behind her desk with several documents spread in front of her, looking every inch the serious executive making difficult decisions. "Emma, thank you for coming in early. Please have a seat." Her tone was professional but noticeably cooler than our previous interactions. "I understand you wanted to discuss something urgent," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk while trying to maintain professional composure. "Yes, I'm afraid I have some difficult news to share with you. After reviewing the marketing department's performance and budget allocation, the leadership team has decided that we need to make some structural changes to improve efficiency and reduce costs." Here it was, the moment I'd been expecting since learning about her relationship with Michael. Jessica was about to fire me, eliminating the obstacle to her perfect new life while claiming it was a business decision based on performance issues. "I see," I replied calmly, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break down. "Effective immediately, we'll be restructuring the marketing department and eliminating several positions, including your role as senior marketing manager. We'll be providing a generous severance package and excellent references to support your transition to new opportunities." I listened to her rehearsed explanation, noting how she avoided making direct eye contact while delivering what was clearly a predetermined decision rather than the result of genuine performance evaluation. "May I ask what specific performance issues led to this decision?" I inquired, maintaining professional tone despite the anger building inside me. "It's not about individual performance," Jessica replied smoothly. "This is about organizational efficiency and adapting to changing market conditions. We need to streamline operations and reduce overhead costs to position TechFlow for sustainable growth." "I understand," I said, standing up to signal the end of our conversation. "When is my last day?" "Today, actually. HR will handle all the paperwork and transition details. Your computer access has already been suspended, but you'll have time to collect any personal items from your office." The dismissal was so abrupt and calculated that it took my breath away. 7 years of marriage and 5 years of dedicated professional service, both ended within 12 hours by the same two people who'd decided I was inconvenient to their happiness. "Thank you for the opportunity to work here," I said with as much dignity as I could muster. I hope the restructuring achieves the results you're hoping for. Jessica nodded curtly, already turning her attention to other documents on her desk, as if I had ceased to exist the moment she'd delivered the news. Walking back to my office to collect my personal belongings felt like a death march through a life I'd thought was permanent. Colleagues looked up with surprise and concern as I began packing family photos and personal items into a cardboard box, clearly sensing that something significant had happened, but unsure how to respond. David appeared in my doorway looking stricken when he realized what was happening. "Emma, what's going on? Are you leaving?" "Restructuring," I explained simply, not trusting myself to provide more details without losing composure entirely. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising with indignation. "You've built this entire department from nothing. The marketing team's performance has been exceptional under your leadership. How can they possibly justify eliminating your position?" "Business decisions," I replied, continuing to pack while fighting back tears. "Sometimes these things happen." David helped me carry my belongings to my car, his anger on my behalf almost overwhelming. "This isn't right, Emma. Everyone knows you're one of the most valuable employees at this company. There has to be more to this decision than they're telling you." If only he knew how much more there was to it. Standing in the TechFlow parking lot with 5 years of my professional life packed into 2 cardboard boxes, I felt like I was surveying the wreckage of everything I'd thought was solid and permanent in my world. My phone buzzed with another text from Michael. "Can we please talk? I heard about your job and I want to help you figure out next steps." The audacity of his offer to help after orchestrating the destruction of both my marriage and career was almost laughable. I blocked his number and drove home to begin figuring out how to rebuild a life that had been systematically dismantled by the 2 people who were supposed to care about my well-being. But as devastating as the past 24 hours had been, something inside me was already beginning to shift from victim to survivor. Jessica and Michael had won this round, but they'd also shown me exactly who they were and what they were capable of. Now I knew what I was dealing with, and I could start making plans based on truth rather than illusion. The next chapter of my life was about to begin, and for the first time in months, I would be writing it myself. The silence in my house felt different now, no longer peaceful but hollow and echoing. Every room held memories of a life I'd thought was real, conversations I'd believed were honest, and plans for a future that had been built on lies. I sat on my kitchen floor with my laptop, searching rental listings in cities I'd never considered living in, trying to imagine starting over somewhere Michael and Jessica couldn't reach. Portland kept appearing in my searches, its vibrant art scene and coffee culture calling to something deep inside me that had been dormant for years. During college, I dreamed of living somewhere creative and unconventional, but Michael had always favored stability and traditional success markers. Now, with no one to consider but myself, those old dreams felt possible again. The severance package Jessica had provided was generous enough to support me for several months, probably guilt money designed to prevent me from causing trouble for TechFlow or making noise about the suspicious timing of my termination. I could file wrongful termination suits or expose the personal conflicts of interest that led to my firing, but pursuing legal action would mean staying entangled with both of them indefinitely. Instead, I decided to take their money and disappear, using their guilt to fund my escape from the wreckage they'd created. Sophie arrived at my house that evening with Thai takeout and a bottle of wine, taking one look at my puffy eyes and exhausted expression before pulling me into a fierce hug. "I can't believe they both betrayed you on the same day," she said, settling onto my couch and immediately opening the wine. "It's like they coordinated their cruelty for maximum impact." "I think they did coordinate it," I admitted, accepting the glass she poured for me. Jessica fired me the morning after I confronted Michael. She probably knew exactly when I'd discovered the truth about their relationship. "That's sociopathic behavior, Emma. Normal people don't orchestrate elaborate schemes to destroy someone's entire life just because they want what that person has." We spent hours talking through everything that had happened, Sophie helping me see the situation clearly instead of getting lost in self-blame and what-if scenarios. She pointed out patterns I'd missed, red flags I'd dismissed, and the calculated nature of both Michael's emotional manipulation and Jessica's professional sabotage. "You know what's really telling?" Sophie said, refilling our glasses as we demolished the pad thai. Michael didn't even try to defend your job or advocate for you with Jessica. He just let her fire you without any pushback. That shows you exactly where his loyalties lie. She was right. In all the shock of discovering their relationship, I hadn't fully processed that Michael had apparently been fine with Jessica eliminating my career as a convenient side effect of their romance. A husband who truly cared about his wife's well-being would have insisted on protecting her professional interests, regardless of their personal problems. I keep thinking about all the times I supported his career over the past 7 years, I said, curling up in the corner of the couch with my wine. I worked overtime to cover our expenses while he was in business school. I celebrated every promotion like it was my own achievement. I networked at company events and helped him practice presentations. And the moment he found someone he thought was more exciting, he just threw all of that away. Because he's selfish and entitled, Sophie replied bluntly. Because he's the kind of person who takes loyalty for granted and assumes it will always be available when convenient. He probably figured you'd wait around while he explored other options, ready to serve as his backup plan if things didn't work out with Jessica. The thought made me feel physically sick, but it rang true. Michael's casual assumption that we could handle this maturely suggested he'd expected me to quietly accept his betrayal and perhaps even remain friends, while he pursued his exciting new relationship. I'm thinking about moving to Portland, I said suddenly, the decision crystallizing as I spoke the words aloud. Sophie raised her eyebrows but didn't seem surprised. That's actually not a crazy idea. Fresh start, new city, no reminders of everything that happened here. Do you have any connections there? None whatsoever, I admitted. But maybe that's exactly what I need. Somewhere I can figure out who I am when I'm not defined by my relationship to Michael or my job at TechFlow. I think it's brilliant, Sophie said, raising her glass in a toast. To Emma Rodriguez, who's about to discover that life without lying husbands and manipulative bosses is actually pretty amazing. Over the next week, I threw myself into planning my escape with the same methodical energy I'd once devoted to marketing campaigns. I researched Portland neighborhoods, contacted rental agencies, and started the process of transferring my professional credentials and references. The activity gave me something concrete to focus on instead of dwelling on the betrayal and loss. Michael continued calling and texting, his messages evolving from apologetic to frustrated to angry as I refused to engage with his attempts at communication. He seemed genuinely surprised that I wasn't willing to discuss the, quote, practical details of our separation on his timeline, as if my hurt and anger were inconvenient obstacles to his efficient transition into his new life. His final voicemail was particularly revealing. Emma, I understand you're upset, but we need to be adults about this situation. Jessica thinks it would be better for everyone if we handled the divorce quickly and quietly, without involving lawyers or making things complicated. I'm willing to give you the house and a fair settlement, but you need to stop being emotional and think practically about what's best for both of us. Jessica thinks. Even in the dissolution of our marriage, he was taking direction from the woman who'd systematically destroyed my life. The message confirmed everything I'd suspected about their relationship dynamic and his complete inability to take responsibility for his own choices. I saved the voicemail as evidence for future divorce proceedings, then blocked his number entirely. Whatever conversations we needed to have about ending our marriage could happen through lawyers once I was settled in Portland and ready to deal with legal formalities. David had been texting regularly since my termination, expressing outrage about TechFlow's decision and offering support however he could provide it. His messages were always thoughtful and genuine, never pushing for more response than I was ready to give, but consistently reminding me that I had friends who valued me regardless of what Michael and Jessica had done. I heard through the office grapevine that Jessica is already making changes to the marketing department, he wrote. She brought in some expensive consulting firm to optimize operations, which apparently means undoing most of the systems you built over the past 5 years. Everyone thinks it's insane, but no one feels safe speaking up given what happened to you. The news should have made me angry, but instead I felt oddly detached from TechFlow's problems. Jessica could destroy the marketing department if she wanted to, could waste money on consultants, and alienate the remaining staff with her authoritarian management style. It was no longer my responsibility to protect the work I'd built or the colleagues I'd cared about. My last week in Austin was a blur of packing, paperwork, and goodbye dinners with friends who were still processing the dramatic changes in my life. Most people had heard about my divorce but didn't know the details about Michael's relationship with Jessica or the circumstances of my termination. I kept explanations vague, not wanting to rehash the painful specifics or turn my departure into gossip material. The morning I loaded my car with everything I could fit and prepared to drive west felt surreal and liberating simultaneously. I was leaving behind everything familiar, everyone I'd known, and every comfortable routine I'd built over the past decade. But I was also escaping the suffocating weight of betrayal and disappointment that had made Austin feel like a crime scene rather than home. Sophie came to see me off, bringing coffee and pastries for the road along with a small wrapped gift. "Don't open it until you get to Portland," she instructed, tears in her eyes despite her encouraging smile. "It's something to remind you that you're braver than you think and stronger than they tried to make you believe." "Thank you for everything," I said, hugging her tightly. "I don't know what I would have done without you these past few weeks." "You would have figured it out," she replied confidently. "You're the most resilient person I know, even when you can't see it yourself. Portland is lucky to get you." The drive to Portland took 2 days, with an overnight stop in Colorado that gave me time to process how far I was traveling from everything that had defined my adult life. I'd never taken a trip this long by myself, never made such a dramatic life change without consulting anyone else, never felt so simultaneously terrified and exhilarated about the future. Somewhere outside Denver, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown Austin number. For a moment, I considered answering, thinking it might be related to my departure logistics, but then I realized it was probably Michael calling from Jessica's phone or a work line trying to reach me one final time. I let it go to voicemail and didn't bother listening to whatever message he'd left. Portland welcomed me with overcast skies and gentle rain that felt refreshing after Austin's relentless sunshine. The city had an immediate appeal that went beyond my practical reasons for choosing it. Something about the pace and energy that felt more aligned with who I'd been before I'd molded myself around Michael's expectations and ambitions. I'd rented a small studio apartment in the Alberta Arts District, a neighborhood full of galleries, coffee shops, and the kind of creative energy I'd been missing without realizing it. The apartment was tiny compared to the house I'd shared with Michael, but it felt like mine in a way that larger space never had. Every decision about furniture, decoration, and daily routine was completely my own. My first week in Portland was dedicated to basic logistics. Opening local bank accounts, registering to vote, finding a grocery store, and exploring the neighborhood on foot. I walked for hours every day, partly to learn the area, and partly because movement helped quiet the anxious thoughts that still plagued me during idle moments. The coffee shop scene in Portland was everything I'd hoped for, and more. Every neighborhood seemed to have multiple independent cafes, each with its own personality and devoted local following. I made it a goal to try a different place each morning, partly for the caffeine and partly for the human connection that came from chatting with baristas and observing the daily rhythms of people who seemed genuinely happy with their unconventional career choices. It was at the Daily Grind, a cozy spot near my apartment with mismatched furniture and local art covering every wall surface, that I first considered whether I might want to work in the coffee industry myself. The idea seemed ridiculous initially. I had an MBA and 5 years of senior management experience, but watching the staff work together with obvious camaraderie and pride in their craft made me question whether traditional corporate success was actually what I wanted. "You're new to the neighborhood," observed Marcus, the morning shift manager who'd served me coffee 3 days running. He was probably in his early 30s. With intricate tattoo sleeves and the kind of genuine warmth that made customers feel like valued friends rather than anonymous transactions. "Just moved here from Austin," I confirmed, settling into my usual corner table with my laptop and the day's coffee exploration. "Welcome to Alberta. What brought you to Portland?" It was a simple question that deserved a simple answer, but the honest response was too complicated for casual coffee shop conversation. "Career change," I said instead. "Thought it was time for something completely different." "Well, you picked the right city for reinvention," Marcus replied with an encouraging smile. "Portland's full of people who decided to completely change their lives and ended up happier than they ever thought possible." Over the following weeks, I fell into comfortable routines that bore no resemblance to my structured corporate schedule in Austin. I woke up naturally instead of to alarm clocks, spent mornings reading and writing in different coffee shops, and used afternoons to explore Portland's neighborhoods, hiking trails, and cultural offerings. For the first time in years, I had no meetings to attend, no deadlines to meet, no one else's needs to prioritize above my own. The freedom was intoxicating, but also occasionally overwhelming. Some days I found myself missing the clear structure and defined purpose of my marketing job, even though I knew that career had been built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. Other days I felt guilty for enjoying my newfound independence, as if happiness was somehow disloyal to the trauma I'd experienced. Gradually, I began to understand that healing wasn't a linear process with clear milestones and completion dates. Some mornings I woke up excited about the possibilities ahead of me, while other days I felt paralyzed by uncertainty about my future direction. Both responses were normal parts of rebuilding a life that had been systematically dismantled by people I'd trusted. One rainy Thursday morning at the Daily Grind, I overheard Marcus discussing staffing challenges with the owner, a stylish woman in her 40s who'd apparently started the coffee shop after leaving a career in finance. "I hate to lose Sarah, but I understand why she's moving back to Seattle," the owner was saying. "Finding reliable people who actually care about coffee culture instead of just needing a paycheck has always been our biggest challenge." "Emma here used to work in corporate," Marcus said, gesturing toward my corner table. "Maybe she'd be interested in some part-time hours while she figures out her next move." I looked up from my laptop, surprised to be drawn into their conversation but oddly intrigued by the possibility. "I've never worked in food service," I admitted. "Unless you count the campus coffee cart during college. The technical stuff is easy to learn," the owner replied, extending her hand with a warm smile. "I'm Diana, and I'm always looking for people who appreciate good coffee and enjoy interacting with customers. The pay isn't corporate level, but the environment is pretty great and the schedule is flexible." Diana. The name hit me like a physical blow, bringing back unwelcome memories of another Diana who'd systematically destroyed my previous life. For a moment, I considered declining the opportunity just to avoid the painful association, but then I realized that would be giving Jessica and Michael power over my future decisions that they didn't deserve. "I'd love to learn more about it," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. That afternoon, Diana gave me an informal tour of the Daily Grind's operations, explaining everything from espresso machine maintenance to customer service philosophy. The work was completely different from anything I'd done professionally, but something about the craft and precision required appealed to the same part of me that had enjoyed building marketing campaigns from concept to execution. "The beauty of coffee service," Diana explained as she demonstrated proper steaming technique, "is that every interaction is an opportunity to make someone's day a little better. You're not just serving beverages, you're creating moments of comfort and connection that people carry with them." Her perspective reminded me why I'd been drawn to marketing in the first place: the desire to create meaningful connections between people and experiences that enhanced their lives. Working at TechFlow had gradually become more about metrics and budget optimization than about the human impact of our campaigns. But coffee service offered the immediate satisfaction of positive customer interactions. "When can you start?" Diana asked after I had successfully prepared 3 different espresso drinks under her supervision. "Tomorrow?" I replied, realizing I was genuinely excited about the prospect of learning something completely new. My first shifts at the Daily Grind were humbling reminders that expertise in one field didn't automatically translate to competence in another. I burned milk, pulled terrible espresso shots, and struggled to keep up with the morning rush pace that Marcus and the other staff handled with effortless grace. But gradually, muscle memory developed, and the mechanical aspects became second nature, allowing me to focus on the customer interaction elements that I found most rewarding. Regular customers began recognizing me and making conversation during slower periods, sharing details about their lives and work that reminded me how much I'd missed genuine human connection. In corporate environments, most professional relationships remained carefully superficial, but coffee shop interactions allowed for authentic warmth and curiosity about other people's experiences. "You're getting good at this," Marcus observed after my 3rd week, watching me handle a complex drink order with newfound confidence. "Diana's happy with how quickly you're picking everything up." "It's different from what I'm used to, but I'm enjoying it more than I expected," I admitted, wiping down the espresso machine between customers. "What did you do before coffee?" he asked, the first time anyone at the Daily Grind had pushed for details about my previous life. Marketing management for a tech company, I replied, keeping the explanation brief and avoiding the painful specifics. That's quite a career change. What made you decide to switch? I considered how to answer honestly without oversharing about personal trauma. I needed to step away from the corporate world for a while and figure out what actually makes me happy. Turns out I like work that involves immediate positive feedback and genuine human connection. Portland's good for that kind of soul-searching, Marcus said with understanding that suggested he'd made his own dramatic life changes. I used to be an accountant before I discovered that I'm much happier when my work involves creativity and community interaction. Working at the daily grind provided structure and purpose to my days, while also giving me space to process everything that had happened in Austin. The physical nature of the work was meditative in a way that office jobs never had been, and the flexible schedule allowed me to explore Portland's hiking trails and cultural offerings during off-peak hours. My apartment began to feel like home as I furnished it with thrift store finds and local artwork that reflected my personal taste rather than compromise with someone else's preferences. For the first time in years, my living space was entirely my own, decorated with things I loved rather than things that looked impressive or met someone else's standards. Sophie called regularly to check on my adjustment to Portland life, always sounding amazed by how much lighter and happier I seemed during our conversations. "You sound like yourself again," she said during one of our weekly check-ins. "I didn't realize how much you'd changed during the final years with Michael until I heard you laugh like that again." "I didn't realize it either," I admitted, settling onto my couch with tea and watching rain streak down my apartment windows. "I think I gradually became whoever I thought he wanted me to be, until I lost track of who I actually was underneath all those expectations." "Well, whoever you're becoming in Portland seems pretty wonderful. I'm proud of you for having the courage to start over, instead of staying stuck in a situation that was slowly destroying you." About 6 weeks into my Portland adventure, I received an unexpected email from David back in Austin. He'd been sending occasional updates about TechFlow office drama, but this message felt different from his usual casual check-ins. "Emma, I hope you're settling in well and finding happiness in your new city. I wanted to reach out because something happened today that I thought you should know about, even though it might be painful to hear. Jessica was fired this morning after the board discovered some financial irregularities in her expense reports and consulting contracts. Apparently, she'd been using company money for personal expenses and steering contracts to firms owned by friends and family members. Robert is coming back as interim CEO while they search for proper replacement. The whole thing is a mess, but at least the marketing department might get back to normal operations. I keep thinking about how differently things might have gone if they discovered her corruption before she had the chance to fire you. Anyway, I hope this news provides some small satisfaction, even though it doesn't undo the damage she caused. Take care of yourself and know that you have friends here who miss you." I read David's message 3 times, trying to process the information and understand how I felt about Jessica's downfall. Part of me felt vindicated, knowing that her unethical behavior had finally caught up with her, and that other people would see her true character. But mostly I felt detached from the drama, as if it was happening to people I'd once known, but no longer had any connection to. Jessica's firing wouldn't restore my job or undo the trauma of discovering Michael's betrayal, but it did confirm that my instincts about her character had been accurate. She was exactly the kind of person who would use professional positions for personal gain and manipulate situations to eliminate perceived obstacles to her desires. I wondered if Michael was still with her now that her career prospects had dimmed, or if he'd already moved on to someone else who could offer him the excitement and advancement he craved. Either way, it was no longer my problem to solve, or my responsibility to care about. That evening at the Daily Grind, I shared David's news with Marcus during a slow period, partly to process the information, and partly because he'd become a trusted friend who understood something about escaping toxic situations. "How do you feel about your former boss getting her comeuppance?" he asked, genuinely curious about my emotional response. "Honestly, mostly indifferent," I replied, surprising myself with how true that statement was. 6 weeks ago it would have felt like justice, but now it just feels like proof that I made the right decision to get away from both of them. "That's probably the healthiest possible response," Marcus observed. "When you're truly moving forward, other people's drama stops feeling personally relevant." "I think you're right." For the first time since everything happened, I feel like I'm focused on building something new, instead of just recovering from what I lost. What does building something new look like for you? He asked, beginning the closing routine that had become familiar and comforting. It was a question I'd been avoiding because the honest answer still felt too fragile and uncertain to say aloud. But standing in the warm glow of the daily grind's evening lighting, surrounded by the comfortable routine of work I'd grown to love, the future felt less terrifying than it had in months. I'm not sure yet, I admitted, but I'm starting to think that might be exactly what I need right now. Space to figure out what I actually want instead of what I think I should want. Marcus smiled as he wiped down the counter one final time. Portland's good for that kind of discovery. Give it time, and the answers will come. Walking home through the Alberta Arts District that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine excitement about the possibilities ahead of me. Michael and Jessica had tried to destroy my life to clear the way for their own happiness, but instead they'd freed me from a situation that was slowly suffocating everything authentic about who I was. Tomorrow would bring another day of learning, growing, and building a life that belonged entirely to me. And for the first time since discovering the truth about my marriage, that felt like the greatest gift I could have received. 3 months in Portland had transformed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. The daily grind had become more than just a workplace. It was my laboratory for rediscovering who I was when I wasn't trying to meet anyone else's expectations. Every perfect espresso shot, every genuine conversation with a regular customer, every small moment of satisfaction built layers of confidence I hadn't realized I'd lost during my final years with Michael. Spring was arriving in Portland with its characteristic dramatic flair, transforming the city from gray and moody to vibrant and alive almost overnight. Cherry blossoms exploded along residential streets, the Saturday markets burst with fresh produce and local crafts, and hiking trails beckoned with the promise of stunning views and peaceful solitude. I'd started taking photography seriously again, carrying my camera on long walks through Forest Park, and discovering that I had an eye for capturing moments of unexpected beauty. Diana had begun talking to me about potentially taking on more responsibility at the daily grind. Maybe helping with marketing and social media strategy. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was considering using my corporate skills to support a small business that represented everything I'd learned to value: authenticity, community connection, and work that contributed to people's daily happiness rather than just quarterly profit margins. You have ideas about expanding our customer base that I'd never considered, Diana said one morning as we reviewed the previous month's sales figures. That loyalty program concept you suggested could really help us compete with the chain stores without compromising what makes us special. I love solving problems like that, I admitted, realizing how much I'd missed the creative challenge of building something from the ground up. At TechFlow, marketing became so focused on metrics and efficiency that I forgot how satisfying it is to help a business connect with people who genuinely appreciate what they're offering. Working with Diana felt like rediscovering the passion that had drawn me to marketing in the first place, before corporate politics and budget pressures had gradually drained the joy from projects I'd once found exciting. Her business was small enough that every decision mattered, personal enough that customer relationships felt meaningful, and flexible enough to accommodate creative experiments that larger companies would never risk. Marcus had become one of my closest friends in Portland, the kind of person who understood major life transitions because he'd navigated his own dramatic career change with courage and intentionality. We often worked shifts together, developing the easy rhythm of colleagues who genuinely enjoyed each other's company and shared similar values about creating positive experiences for other people. You seem different lately, he observed one afternoon as we cleaned equipment during a rare lull between the lunch rush and afternoon pickup. More settled, like you're not just passing through anymore, but actually building something here. I think I am building something, I replied, surprising myself with how naturally the words came. For the first time in years, I'm making decisions based on what I actually want, rather than what I think I should want, or what someone else expects from me. That's huge, Marcus said, understanding the significance of that shift in a way that only someone who'd made similar changes could appreciate. When did you realize you were ready to stop just surviving and start actually living again? It was a profound question that made me pause and consider the gradual transformation I'd been experiencing. I think it was when I stopped checking my phone hoping for apologies or explanations from people who'd already shown me exactly who they were. When I realized I was more interested in planning my weekend hiking trip than in knowing what was happening to my former life in Austin. That's the moment when you know you've really moved on, Marcus agreed with a smile. When the future becomes more interesting than the past, even when the past involved serious trauma. That evening, I was closing the daily grind alone, enjoying the peaceful ritual of cleaning equipment and preparing for the next day's service, when my phone rang with a call from Sophie. She'd been my lifeline during the darkest period after discovering Michael's betrayal, and now our weekly conversations had evolved into celebrating the positive changes I was making, rather than just processing trauma and loss. "Emma, I have some news that you need to hear," Sophie said without her usual cheerful greeting, her tone serious enough to make me immediately alert. "What's wrong?" I asked, setting down the towel I'd been using to wipe counters, and giving her my full attention. "Michael showed up at my apartment today. He's in Portland, and he's looking for you." The words hit me like ice water, instantly transforming my peaceful evening into something tense and threatening. "What do you mean he showed up at your apartment?" He knocked on my door around noon, looking terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. "He said he'd been trying to reach you for weeks, that he needed to talk to you about important things you needed to know. When I told him I didn't have your address or any obligation to help him contact you, he got angry and started demanding that I tell him where you were living." "What did you say to him?" I asked, my hands beginning to shake as I processed the implications of Michael's presence in my new city. "I told him that if you'd wanted him to know where you were, you wouldn't have blocked his number and moved across the country without leaving forwarding information. I said that showing up at my apartment was inappropriate, and that he needed to respect your clearly stated desire for no contact. How did he even know you'd have my contact information?" "He said he'd been calling everyone from your old life trying to find someone who could reach you. Apparently he's desperate to talk to you about something related to the divorce proceedings, but honestly, Emma, he seemed more obsessed than concerned about legal technicalities. The thought of Michael systematically contacting my friends and former colleagues, trying to track me down across state lines, made me feel violated and vulnerable in a way I hadn't experienced since leaving Austin. I'd thought moving to Portland would create enough distance to prevent him from disrupting my new life, but apparently I'd underestimated his persistence and sense of entitlement. Did he say anything specific about why he needed to find me? He kept talking about how you'd left without giving him a chance to explain everything, how there were things about the situation with Jessica that you didn't understand. He claimed that if you knew the whole truth, you'd realize he'd been trying to protect you rather than betray you." "Protect me," I repeated, unable to keep the bitter laugh from my voice. "By lying to me for months while building a relationship with another woman who then fired me from my job?" "That's exactly what I said to him," Sophie replied, with the fierce loyalty that had sustained me through the worst period of my life. "I told him that his version of protection looked remarkably similar to systematic deception and manipulation, and that maybe the reason you didn't want to talk to him was because you'd finally seen his true character." "How did he react to that?" "He got defensive and angry, started talking about how everyone was turning against him and preventing him from fixing mistakes he'd made. It was clear he still doesn't understand that the problem isn't miscommunication or misunderstanding. It's the fundamental choices he made about how to treat someone who loved and trusted him." Michael's presence in Portland felt like contamination of the safe space I'd worked so hard to create. Every decision I'd made about where to live, work, and spend my time had been based on building a life that belonged entirely to me, free from the toxic dynamics that had characterized my final years in Austin. Now he was threatening to bring all of that chaos and manipulation back into my carefully constructed peace. "Sophie, I need you to promise me that you won't give him any information about me, no matter what sob story he tells or how desperate he claims to be." "Emma, you don't even need to ask. I would never betray your trust like that, especially not to someone who's already proven he doesn't deserve access to your life." Her voice was warm, with the kind of unconditional support that reminded me what real friendship looked like. "I just can't believe he's actually here. I thought I'd put enough distance between us that he'd eventually give up and move on with Jessica or whoever else he's found to replace me." From what he said, things didn't work out with Jessica after she was fired. Apparently she blamed him for the exposure of her financial crimes, claimed that his emotional neediness had distracted her from being careful about covering her tracks. The information about Jessica should have provided some satisfaction, but instead it just made me feel tired and sad about the waste of energy that both of them represented. They destroyed my marriage and career to pursue a relationship that had imploded the moment real consequences emerged, and now Michael was trying to drag me back into their dysfunction, as if I could somehow help him make sense of the mess he'd created. I don't care what happened between them, I said firmly, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Whatever problems Michael is having now are the natural consequences of his choices, and they're not my responsibility to solve. That's exactly the attitude you need to maintain, Sophie agreed. Don't let him convince you that you owe him anything, including explanations, forgiveness, or opportunities to justify his behavior. After we hung up, I finished closing the daily grind with mechanical efficiency, while my mind raced through possible scenarios and precautions. How had Michael found out I was in Portland? Had he hired a private investigator, or was he just systematically checking cities I'd mentioned during our marriage? How long was he planning to stay? And what would I do if he actually found me? The walk home to my apartment felt different that night. No longer peaceful and contemplative, but watchful and tense. Every person I passed made me wonder if Michael was somewhere nearby, waiting for an opportunity to ambush me with whatever manipulative explanation he'd prepared for his months of deception. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by anxiety about whether my building's security was adequate, and whether I should consider staying somewhere else until Michael gave up and returned to Austin. I'd worked so hard to build a sense of safety and independence in Portland, and now the mere knowledge that he was in the same city was threatening to undermine everything I'd accomplished. The next morning at the daily grind, I was distracted and jumpy, constantly glancing toward the windows and door despite Marcus's attempts to engage me in our usual easy conversation. Diana noticed my agitation and asked if everything was okay, but I wasn't ready to explain the full situation to my new friends and colleagues. Just some personal stuff from my previous life trying to interfere with my new one, I said, focusing on preparing drink orders with unusual intensity. Anything I can help with? Diana offered with genuine concern. I don't think so, but thank you. I'm hoping it will resolve itself quickly. Around 2 o'clock, during the afternoon lull, when Marcus had gone to make a bank deposit and I was working alone, the bell above the daily grind's door chimed to announce a customer. I looked up from the espresso machine and felt my entire body freeze with shock and recognition. Michael stood in the doorway looking haggard and desperate, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled in a way that suggested he'd been traveling and searching for days. His eyes found mine across the coffee shop with an intensity that made me instinctively step backward toward the employee area behind the counter. Emma? He said, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and desperation that made my skin crawl. Thank God I found you. We need to talk. No, we don't, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. You need to leave this establishment immediately. Please, just 5 minutes. There are things you don't understand about what happened, things I need to explain so you can make informed decisions about our future. Our future? I repeated, incredulous at his presumption that we had any shared future to discuss. Michael, I moved across the country specifically to get away from you. I blocked your number, filed for divorce, and made it clear that I never wanted to see you again. What part of that suggested I was interested in hearing explanations? Emma, please, he said, stepping closer to the counter despite my obvious discomfort with his presence. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I've learned things about Jessica that change everything. She manipulated both of us, used me to get to you, played us against each other for her own agenda. And that's supposed to excuse 4 months of lying to me while you built a relationship with her? I asked, noting that other customers in the coffee shop were beginning to notice our tense interaction. I was weak and confused, Emma. Jessica was incredibly manipulative, made me believe that you didn't appreciate what I was trying to accomplish, that our marriage was holding us both back from reaching our potential. She convinced me that leaving you would be better for everyone involved. His attempt to shift responsibility onto Jessica while portraying himself as a victim of manipulation was so infuriating that I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep my composure. Michael, you're a grown man who made deliberate choices about how to treat your wife. Jessica didn't force you to lie to me, didn't make you sneak around behind my back, didn't compel you to let her fire me from my job. She said she was going to help both of us transition to better situations, he insisted, his voice rising with frustration. She promised she could get you a better position at a different company, claimed that TechFlow was limiting your potential anyway. Even if that were true, which I seriously doubt, the ethical approach would have been to discuss it with me openly, rather than orchestrating elaborate deceptions, I replied, my own voice getting louder as the anger I'd been suppressing for months finally found its outlet. I was trying to protect you from unnecessary hurt while we figured out the best way to handle a complicated situation, Michael said, his tone becoming more defensive and less apologetic. Protect me, I repeated, the word feeling toxic in my mouth. You protected me right into unemployment and divorce proceedings. You protected me by allowing another woman to destroy my career while you built a secret relationship with her. That's not protection, Michael. That's systematic betrayal disguised as consideration. Emma, I love you, he said suddenly, the words landing with no impact because they'd been emptied of meaning by months of contrary actions. I made terrible mistakes, but I never stopped loving you. Jessica made me believe that what we had wasn't enough, but I realize now that she was wrong. You're the woman I want to spend my life with. You had the opportunity to spend your life with me, I replied, feeling surprisingly calm despite the emotional intensity of the confrontation. You chose to throw that away for someone who seemed more exciting and advantageous. The fact that your exciting new relationship didn't work out doesn't mean you get to come back and reclaim what you discarded. People make mistakes, Emma. Marriages go through difficult periods, and couples work through problems together if they're committed to making things work. This wasn't a difficult period, Michael. This was you systematically deceiving me while building an alternative life with someone else. This was you allowing that person to use her professional power to eliminate me as an obstacle to your relationship. Those aren't mistakes, they're fundamental character revelations. Marcus chose that moment to return from the bank, immediately assessing the situation, and positioning himself near the counter in a way that suggested he was prepared to intervene if necessary. Is everything okay here? He asked, his tone polite but alert. This is my husband, I said, the word feeling strange and disconnected from my current reality. He was just leaving. Actually, I was hoping Emma and I could have a private conversation, Michael said, directing his attention to Marcus with obvious irritation at the interruption. Actually, this is my workplace, and I'm not interested in private conversations with people who've repeatedly violated my clearly stated boundaries, I replied firmly. Emma, you're being unreasonable, Michael said, his veneer of apologetic desperation beginning to crack and reveal the entitled anger underneath. I drove all the way to Portland to try to fix what's been broken between us, and you won't even give me the courtesy of listening to what I have to say. I don't owe you courtesy, I said, my voice rising again as months of suppressed fury finally found expression. I don't owe you listening time, understanding, or opportunities to justify behavior that systematically destroyed my trust and security. You made your choices, Michael. Now live with the consequences. You can't just throw away 7 years of marriage because of a few months of poor judgment, he protested, his tone becoming more aggressive as his manipulation tactics failed to achieve the desired effect. I'm not throwing away our marriage, I replied with crystalline clarity. You already did that when you decided Jessica was more important than honesty, loyalty, or basic respect for the woman who'd supported you through every challenge and celebrated every success. So that's it? Michael asked, his mask finally slipping completely to reveal the angry, entitled person underneath. You're going to punish me forever for making mistakes during a stressful period? I'm not punishing you, I said, feeling a sense of liberation I hadn't expected. I'm protecting myself from someone who's proven they don't value honesty or commitment. I'm choosing to build a life with people who understand what loyalty and integrity actually mean. Michael looked around the daily grind as if seeing it clearly for the first time, taking in the modest but warm atmosphere, my coffee-stained apron, and Marcus's protective presence beside me. This is what you chose over our life together, he asked with undisguised contempt. Working in a coffee shop in some hipster neighborhood, pretending this is better than everything we built in Austin? Yes, I replied without hesitation. I chose honesty over deception, genuine connection over manipulation, and self-respect over settling for someone who sees me as disposable when something more exciting comes along. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," Michael said, his voice now fully revealing the anger and entitlement that had probably always been present beneath his charming exterior. "The biggest mistake of my life was staying in a marriage with someone who was capable of betraying me so completely," I replied. "Leaving you was the smartest decision I've ever made." Michael stared at me for several seconds, clearly realizing that none of his prepared arguments or emotional manipulations were going to achieve the outcome he'd traveled across the country to secure. "Fine," he said finally, his tone bitter and defeated. "But don't come crawling back when you realize what you've given up. Don't expect me to be available when this fantasy life you're building inevitably falls apart." "I won't," I promised with complete sincerity. "Have a safe trip back to Austin, Michael. And please don't contact me again." He stormed out of the daily grind without another word, leaving me shaking with adrenaline and a profound sense of closure I hadn't expected to feel. Marcus immediately moved to lock the front door and flipped the sign to closed, giving me space to process what had just happened. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his concern genuine and undemanding. "I think I am," I replied, surprising myself with how true that felt. "I think I'm actually better than okay." "That was incredibly brave," Marcus said with admiration. "You stood your ground against someone who clearly expected to manipulate you back into the relationship he'd thrown away." "For months I wondered what I would say if I ever saw him again," I admitted, settling onto one of the coffee shop's stools as the adrenaline began to fade. "I imagined dramatic confrontations where I'd make him understand how much he'd hurt me, or scenarios where he'd grovel and beg for forgiveness. But when it actually happened, I realized I didn't need him to understand or apologize. I just needed to be clear about my own boundaries and choices." "That's real strength," Marcus observed. "Not needing someone else's validation or remorse to feel complete about your own decisions." Diana arrived a few minutes later, having seen Michael's dramatic exit from her car in the parking lot. She took one look at my shaken but determined expression and immediately understood that something significant had just occurred. "Was that someone from your previous life causing trouble?" she asked with protective concern. "My ex-husband," I explained. "He tracked me down to Portland and thought he could convince me to give him another chance after he destroyed our marriage and my career." "And how did that work out for him?" Diana asked with a slight smile that suggested she could guess the answer. "Not very well," I replied, feeling a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside. "Turns out that 3 months of rediscovering my own worth makes it pretty easy to recognize manipulative behavior and refuse to accept it." "Good for you," Diana said firmly. "No one deserves to be treated the way you've described, and you have every right to build a life that doesn't include people who've proven they can't be trusted." That evening, I called Sophie to tell her about Michael's visit and the confrontation that had finally provided closure to the most painful chapter of my life. "How do you feel now that you've actually seen him and said everything you needed to say?" she asked. "Surprisingly peaceful," I replied, settling onto my couch with tea and watching the Portland skyline light up as evening settled over the city. I spent so much energy being angry about what he'd done, wondering how he could justify his choices, wanting him to understand the damage he'd caused. But when I actually saw him today, I realized that none of that matters anymore. What matters instead? The life I'm building here. The work I love. The friends who actually value honesty and loyalty. The sense of peace I feel when I wake up knowing that everyone in my world treats me with genuine respect and care. That's exactly what matters, Sophie agreed with warmth and pride. Michael tried to come back and reclaim something he'd thrown away, but you've already moved so far beyond who you were when you were with him that his manipulation couldn't touch you. I think you're right, I said, feeling the truth of that statement settle into my bones. The woman who was married to Michael Rodriguez doesn't exist anymore. She was replaced by someone stronger, clearer about her values, and unwilling to accept anything less than authentic love and respect. 6 months later, I was managing the Daily Grind's marketing initiatives, while Diana expanded to a second location across town. My photography had developed into a side business documenting local restaurants and small businesses, work that combined my marketing expertise with artistic skills I'd forgotten I possessed. Marcus had become my closest friend and occasional hiking companion, the kind of person who understood that meaningful relationships were built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation, rather than need or convenience. The divorce from Michael had been finalized with minimal drama once his attempt at reconciliation had failed. He'd returned to Austin and apparently started dating someone new within weeks, confirming that his declaration of love had been more about ego and possession than authentic emotion. Jessica had disappeared from Austin's business community entirely after her firing from TechFlow, her reputation too damaged by the financial scandal to recover in a competitive market. I occasionally wondered if she and Michael ever thought about the elaborate scheme they'd constructed to eliminate me from their path to happiness, and whether they'd learned anything from watching their own relationship implode under the weight of selfishness and manipulation. But mostly, I didn't think about either of them at all. The past had become irrelevant compared to the vibrant present I was creating and the exciting future I was planning. Portland had given me space to rediscover who I was when I wasn't trying to meet someone else's expectations or compensate for someone else's emotional shortcomings. Standing behind the espresso machine at the daily grind on a busy Saturday morning, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of satisfied customers and colleagues who'd become genuine friends, I felt grateful for every painful step that had led me to this moment. Michael and Jessica had tried to destroy my life to clear the way for their own happiness, but instead they'd freed me from a situation that was slowly suffocating everything authentic about who I was. The morning rush was in full swing when a familiar face appeared at the counter. David, my former colleague from TechFlow, grinning widely as he approached. "Emma Rodriguez," he said with obvious delight. "I was hoping I'd find you here. I'm in Portland for a conference, and someone told me you were working at the best coffee shop in the Alberta Arts District." "David!" I exclaimed, genuinely thrilled to see a friendly face from my previous life. "What brings you to Portland?" "Marketing conference downtown, but I specifically asked around about independent coffee shops because I was hoping to track you down." His smile was warm and uncomplicated, the kind of authentic happiness that reminded me what healthy professional relationships could look like. "How's TechFlow managing without their best marketing manager?" he asked as I prepared his drink order. "Probably better than I expected," I replied with a laugh. "Turns out that when you build good systems and train people well, organizations can survive even dramatic leadership changes." "Actually, things have been pretty chaotic since Jessica's departure," David admitted. "Robert came back as interim CEO, but the marketing department has gone through 3 different consultants trying to rebuild what you'd created. Everyone talks about how much better things were when you were running the show. That's flattering to hear, but I'm honestly happier doing something completely different," I said, realizing how much I meant it. Corporate marketing was rewarding in some ways, but this work feels more immediately meaningful. Every interaction here is an opportunity to make someone's day a little better. "You seem really happy," David observed, his tone carrying genuine appreciation for the transformation he was witnessing. "Like, genuinely content in a way that I don't remember seeing when you were at TechFlow." "I am happy," I confirmed, surprised by how easily the words came. It took some time to rebuild after everything fell apart, but I'm grateful now for the push to discover what I actually wanted, instead of what I thought I should want. We talked for another few minutes about his conference, my photography business, and the positive changes happening in both our lives. When he left, David promised to stay in touch and to recommend the daily grind to anyone he knew visiting Portland. "Take care of yourself, Emma," he said with sincere warmth. "I'm really glad you landed somewhere that appreciates what an amazing person you are." As I watched him walk away, I reflected on how different it felt to reconnect with someone from my previous life now that I'd gained perspective on everything that had happened. David represented the positive aspects of my time at TechFlow: genuine professional relationships, meaningful work, and the satisfaction of building something valuable. Michael and Jessica had tried to convince me that my entire previous life had been a failure, but the reality was more nuanced than their manipulative narrative had suggested. The afternoon shift brought its usual rhythm of regular customers, casual conversations, and the satisfying craft of creating perfect espresso drinks. Marcus worked beside me with easy competence, and Diana stopped by to discuss plans for the second location that would give us both new opportunities for growth and creativity. You know, Diana said as we reviewed potential marketing strategies for the expansion, when I hired you, I thought I was just getting temporary help from someone who was between careers. I had no idea I was actually gaining a business partner who would help take the daily grind to the next level. Business partner? I asked, intrigued by the possibility she seemed to be suggesting. I've been thinking about offering you a stake in both locations in exchange for taking on more responsibility for marketing, social media, and expansion planning. Your background gives you insights I don't have, and your artistic eye has already improved our brand presence significantly. The offer was unexpected but immediately appealing, representing exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been hoping would emerge as I rebuilt my professional life. Working as Diana's partner would combine my corporate expertise with the authentic, community-focused values I'd discovered were essential to my happiness. I'm definitely interested in exploring that possibility, I said, excitement building as I considered the implications. It would be amazing to help build something from the ground up again, but this time with someone who shares my values about treating employees and customers with genuine respect. Let's plan to sit down next week and discuss the details, Diana suggested with a smile that indicated she was as excited about the partnership as I was. That evening, I walked home through the Alberta Arts District feeling profoundly grateful for the unexpected path my life had taken. The street art seemed more vibrant, the evening light more golden, and the sense of possibility more tangible than ever before. Portland had given me space to heal from betrayal and discover who I was when I wasn't trying to compensate for someone else's emotional dysfunction. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Saw your latest Instagram photos from that hiking trip. You look radiant, like someone who's finally living the life she was meant to live. So proud of how far you've come. I smiled as I typed back. Thanks for being there during the dark period. I couldn't have imagined this outcome when I was sitting on my kitchen floor planning my escape from Austin. But it turns out that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you creates space for the best thing that hasn't happened yet. The response came quickly. That's beautiful, and so true. Can't wait to visit Portland and see your new world in person. Standing on my apartment balcony that night, looking out over a city that had become home in ways Austin never quite had, I thought about the elaborate scheme Michael and Jessica had constructed to eliminate me from their path to happiness. They'd succeeded in destroying my marriage and my job, but they'd failed to anticipate that losing those things might actually free me to discover something better. The woman who'd been married to Michael Rodriguez had been gradually disappearing anyway, slowly suffocated by the effort of meeting expectations and compensating for someone else's emotional shortcomings. Portland had given her space to die completely and be replaced by someone clearer about her values, stronger in her boundaries, and unwilling to settle for anything less than authentic love and respect. Michael and Jessica had tried to write me out of their story, but instead, they'd given me the opportunity to become the author of my own. Tomorrow would bring another day of work I loved, relationships built on honesty and mutual appreciation, and the ongoing adventure of building a life that belonged entirely to me. The future stretched ahead bright with possibility, and for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see what came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.